We're currently looking at the passenger side rear wheel, and as you can see, there's some rust forming right here. Same exact rust is forming on the driver's side. There's also some rust forming on the hood of the vehicle, which is unfortunate. What I already did is I washed the car, and then we'll start sanding these and body fill, and then prime, paint, and clear coat. Hopefully look brand new. We'll see how it goes. It did not go well. Took a lot longer than I thought it would. I made a couple of mistakes, especially one big mistake. And if I were purely into this just for flipping the car and making some money, I wouldn't have done this at all. But I wanted to learn, and boy did I. I'm glad that I did it, got the experience of doing it to know that I don't want to do body work again. So looking at the passenger side wheel towards the rear of the vehicle, there's a Phillips head bolt that I removed there, an 8mm bolt that I've already removed right there. So this is kind of loose now, but it didn't swing down as I thought it might. So I came around to the back. There was a cover over this, looks like this, and I pinched it this way as the clip looks like this. And hiding beneath that is a 10mm bolt that I removed on this side but not yet on this side. And then underneath there are two clips. I removed them both already, but just to show, one's right there. This is the center of the vehicle, and then there's a symmetrical one right there. Those are just plastic clips, and they look somewhat like this right here. So now, still have to remove this one, the two bolts on this side, and I would imagine that the whole rear bumper cover is now going to come off. So as you can see, the rear bumper cover is now completely detached. I've always wondered, like, once you remove those bolts, how it comes off. It was still staying on, and people who work on cars, I guess, sort of know what they're doing, but if you're not just like me, you always wonder like how these clips all fit in place. So you see these, they're kind of like just little holes around the side, right? And then there's the exact same on the other side. And then there's these like plastic kind of little pieces. I think these are screwed in place. So there are screws that hold this black piece to the body of the vehicle. And then in here, this is sort of, I guess, where those clips sit. So they get pushed in, and these clips here just sort of expand. It slides in, and they snap down. Anyway, so now the rear bumper cover's off. There was like rocks and dirt in here, so I'm gonna clean that up. I'm starting to sand the bit on this side and the other side. 120 grit sandpaper. Just because I have access to this, I'm going to use it, but on the hood I probably will do it by hand. 120 grit all the way around the car. So I just finished the 180 grit. I'm now going to start the 300 grit sandpaper. As you can see, got most of the rust off. Doing the best I can anyway. This looks the same on the other side. And then the hood, I guess the rust went all the way through, so I've added some speed holes. As you can sort of see, the rust went right through. And so I'm going to just continue with the process, and hopefully we can fill in these holes. So I just finished sanding with 300 grit. I used isopropyl alcohol and a rag to clean the surfaces as best as I could. I then used this file. I didn't rub it, but I just impressed it so the little grooves would indent into the surface, so that way the hardener would have something to bite into. This is the hardener that I'm using. I'm just going to follow the instructions, whatever it says, but what I've heard is if you make a circle about half an inch in height, put a bead of the hardener across the diameter. The hardener is in the lid. You can see it right there. That'll be the proper ratio, but I'm just going to follow whatever the instructions say on this stuff. I also took a piece of cardboard and I taped some parchment paper to the top so it give me a nice clean surface to mix the hardener on. Once I mix the hardener, the way that you mix it is you kind of scoop it all up, and once it's on, you turn it over and smear it flat down again. And you kind of work it down rather than stirring it. Stirring it will introduce air bubbles, and you don't want that, so you just want to scoop it all up, smear it down, scoop it all up, smear it down. Once I have it mixed, I'm going to quickly apply it to the body panels so that way it doesn't harden here but hardens on the car. So I applied the first layer of hardener did a so-so job. I went over to the other side, the driver's side, was able to do that, but before I was able to make it to the front where the hood is and where those pinholes are, the hardener was too hard on the pallet, so I'm gonna have to mix more. It really hardens fast. You gotta mix it quickly and like apply it right away. So I'm gonna mix up some more, do the hood, and hopefully by that time I can go back to the back, sand this down, and put on a second coat everywhere. I just put a first coat on the hood, trying to fill the holes. I was able to fill that hole not so much, so it's going to need some more. This hole was filled proper, and same with this hole, but it's going to need a second coat after I sand this. Here I applied a second layer of Bondo. I didn't sand between coats, hopefully that's okay, but it did dry, so that'll hopefully build up enough of a layer that I can just sand it down using the power sander. So I just finished the first layer of sanding. What I learned is highly recommend sand between layers of putty. I did that mistake, I guess, on one side. Definitely want to sand between layers of puttying. Looks like I gotta sand a little bit more here. It didn't stick very well right in there, so I'll just have to clean it extra good this time and try again. Over on the hood, 3 of the 4 holes are completely filled in, so right there looks good. Down here, nice and smooth, and over here it's a little bit rough, but the hole is filled. This is the only hole that couldn't get completely filled, but definitely on the second coat of puttying, I think that'll be taken care of. I might do a third coat just to make it nice and as smooth as possible. And this is the area where I did 2 coats of putty before I sanded, and it just took extra long to sand it down. I'm really glad that I have the power sander, but obviously it's not perfect just yet. Got to sand down different areas, make it a little bit smoother, but overall it's pretty good. It's nice, it's fairly smooth, trying to keep the contour of the wheel well right there, but overall so good so far. And now I'm going to clean with alcohol again and repeat the process. So more putty, more sanding, and probably a third layer, more putty, more sanding, and using the alcohol between each step to make sure that there's no dirt or anything on the surface. After my final sanding bit, I went over it last with 180, and then I did 400 grit sandpaper, fairly smooth. I then went ahead and folded paper in this kind of pattern here, so if there's overspray, it kind of feathers in around the wheel arch there. I covered up the wheel as well. Did the same thing on the other side, and I put a garbage bag, or 3 garbage bags, wrapped underneath the hood to collect any overspray. I don't really sure how to do this with like the touch spots. Like, I don't want to just go with tap, I kind of want to feather it on. So there's going to be overspray. I also taped off the nozzles there for the windshield wiper fluid. I'm going to follow the instructions on this filler primer. 3 coats, 10 minutes apart, give or take. Just read the instructions, that's basically what it says to do, 1 foot apart, and light coats. So after the first coat, that's sort of what it looks like. I didn't want to get complete coverage, just a nice light coat. As you can see, there's obviously some overspray, some spray on the paper here. Didn't do the best job on the hood. Tried to not let wind get in the way, and obviously there was overspray. You can see that spot there, and then over here kind of just got everywhere. The wind kind of sometimes would take it, sometimes wouldn't, so it's hard to get coverage, but I just wanted to do a light coat. We'll do more coats after 10 minutes. It's been sort of just been sitting like this for a week, so I just wanted to give a rundown of how it looked now. The actual surface is pretty rough where I painted, but it's flush. There was no holes anymore where the holes sort of used to be, as you can see. This is the last spot here. I'm going to clean it with some alcohol. I'm then going to sand it with 600 grit sandpaper, light pressure. Then I'm going to put 3 coats of paint. This is the color code that matched the original paint on the car. So 3 coats of that according to the instructions, and then 3 more coats with the clear coat right there as per the instructions on that. So I temporarily took off the paper that I was using to kind of layer in the paint. just so that way when I do my first layer of sanding, nothing's really in the way. Just figured it'd be easier to do it that way. So I've already used the alcohol right there, wiped down the surface, trying to make it as clean and dust free as possible. Next step is to use the sander over there, 600 grit, do a nice light coat on all the areas that I'm working on. I've reapplied the paper so that way it has like a feathering effect as I apply the coat. Just read the instructions here. It says 8 to 10 inches away from the surface using a sweeping motion, 2 to 3 light coats, 10 minutes between coats, and I think it's at about half an hour before we apply the clear coat. So we're going to get started with applying this evenly across all 3. So I applied the first coat of this, following the instructions, shaking it for a minute prior to. Definitely did not come out as I thought it would. I've only applied 1 coat so far. It came out thick and very watery, so I was worried it's going to start running. I just applied what I thought was a fairly light coat. I did even lighter on the other side just to try to avoid runs, but I think it's going to be inevitable. It's so watery. I don't know if I did something wrong or whatnot. I found out later that there's supposed to be an atomizer. It's basically this tiny little bit of plastic that sticks in the nozzle that comes with the can of paint. But my can that I bought didn't have that, and I didn't know that it was supposed to have it to begin with, considering the primer and the clear coat that I've used on the headlights didn't need an atomizer. It was kind of built into the head. So that was what the problem was, but I didn't realize this until it was way too late. Anyways, that's just coat number 1. Hopefully with multiple coats it'll cover up that primer. And then maybe if I can sand it down, I can make it look sort of regular or normal. But anyway, that's how it sort of looks right now. Not impressed, but I'll, I guess, reserve judgment till after. I just applied the second coat of this, which was even more discouraging than the first coat. It came out very clumpy, not an even mist or spray or anything, despite my rapid and consistent shaking of the can. Definitely I'm worried about drips, despite the fact that I'm feathering it on. It's just coming out so clumpy and thick, and not a nice even aerosol spray. That's what's causing this result. There's even air bubbles where it's like dripping, because it's dripping out of the can, and where it's landed on the paint you can sort of see different spots. Definitely less than ideal. Kind of disappointed. I'm going to apply maybe 2 or 3 more coats to try to just get even coverage, and then maybe I can sand it all out, all the bumps and whatnot. Cross my fingers that that'll work, and if not, I guess another day with more coats. Coat 3, it definitely went on a lot better than the first 2 coats. What I did, figured I got nothing to lose, was I just shook it very vigorously, the can, for the entire 10 minutes that I was waiting between coat 2 and 3. This is the result after coat 3. It's definitely a lot fuller, and the spray was a lot better. Still, I would say far from ideal, but definitely better than the first 2 coats. So I guess the moral of the story is when you use a rattle can, shake the hell out of it for as long as you can before you apply it and between each steps. Maybe this can was just sitting for a long time before I bought it. I still think I'm going to have issues once this is all dry. I'm going to definitely have to go over it again with a sanding block coating. That was my 4th coat. Definitely starting to get some coverage. However, the consistency that it comes out at is not very aerosol-like. It's not a nice spray. It's clumpy and drippy, and I think the plan that I'm going to have to do for today that I thought I was going to have is going to be scrapped. Instead, I'm going to put maybe 2 or 3 more coats on here, so I might have like 6 coats when I'm all said and done of the white paint. It's going to be way too heavy in certain areas, but I'm doing it to get enough coverage in the sparser areas. I even touched the paint right there. I ran out of my white paint. I still didn't get full coverage because of how gloppy and drippy it was coming out of the can. But that's how one side looks. As I mentioned, I think I've probably put 5 to 6 coats on, and it's bubbling and too heavy and dripping in a number of areas. But then there's also some areas where there is not enough coverage, and it just does not look good. I'm not very happy. Hopefully I'll let this paint dry, all bubbly and drippy and all that stuff. I've never done this before, so hopefully I can just sand it out smooth, and it'll just blend all nicely afterwards. I think that's it for me for today. Maybe in a couple days after it dries, that's when I'll come out, sand it with 1500 grit or something like that, and then I'll clean it, and then apply clear coat, 3 coats after that. So this is what the passenger side rear wheel well looks like after that pretty bad rattle can spray paint. You can start to see like bubbles and too much clumps and whatnot in different areas. Similar, but I think even more so on this side. You can see how awful it turned out. So that's why, unexpectedly, because of this, I'm going to sand it. I'm going to try with 1500 grit, which may be too fine for this. Same issues on the hood. You can see like bumps and areas like that. It's pretty much everywhere the paint got, in a lot of spots I didn't want it to, and then there was not enough coverage in getting it over the primer. So I'm going to try 1500 grit sandpaper now to try to smooth out those bumps. Getting frustrated, so I kind of gave up, waited a couple days, kind of came to my senses, and I decided I'm going to try doing it all over again. So what I did was I took 320 grit sandpaper, kind of doing it on the fly, and I made that decision to sand it all back down again. I'm going to try to re-primer just these touch-up spots right here, sand that down again, and then try repainting with a new can of spray paint that's white, and just basically starting over again from the point of sanding and priming. We'll see how that goes. So I've already sanded with 320 on this side. As you can see, it's exposed some spots here. Maybe got to do a little bit more right there. But all those spots, because of the poor white spray that I applied previously, are gone from this side. So it's just starting all over. As I continue to sand with the 320 grit sandpaper to get off all the white bumps of chunks of spray paint that came out in clumps, I've noticed that like I started to see this like smearing. I don't know if it's showing up on camera. It's basically, I think, white paints that I've been able to flake off, but then gets pushed back into the paint here. So it's loose, but it's there. And as you can see, when I sand it, you can see the spots of white paint that came out off of the vehicle in chunks, because that's how it sort of landed on the car when it was originally sprayed. Just not a very good even spray of smaller droplets with an even coat. So I've been sort of using my fingernail to pick out the little bumps of white paint that clog up the sandpaper, so I can continue to sand and to prevent it from being kind of re-smeared into the paint just like that, and get it all smooth. As you can see, I've pretty much removed all the bumps. You can see some discoloration still sort of right there. Perhaps it's flat enough and smooth enough that if I repainted white over it, it'll be flush and completely white. So just a little bit more touch up here. So I just used some primer, very light, just kind of in the very specific spots that had exposed metal. I'll probably do 2, possibly a 3rd coat, 10 minutes break between each coat, just exactly the same as last time. I'm definitely trying to not go heavy, especially in areas that are not needed, and just evenly spraying where I think it might be needed, as you can see here. So I probably won't film it, but after 10 minutes I'll touch it up again, 10 more minutes, spray it again, and then call it for the day. So it's been a while since I last worked on the car. mainly due to frustration. But I did buy a new can of white paint that looked like this. So there was like an actual little tab in there. I resanded, I reprimed, sanded with 600 grit after the primer over here, and then on the far side, same as well over here, and on the hood I resanded again. And so I'm just going to cover up this primer. After I primed, like I said, 600 grit sandpaper, so it's a little bit smooth now. I'm going to do 3 coats of the paint. I just put on the first coat of this, and I don't know, it's starting to look the same as it did the last time I did this. I mean, the can came looking nicer, shook the can very nicely, but it's coming out very clumpy and watery and runny. There's also air pockets in the paint, it looks like, so it's causing bubbling. Just does not look good. But I'm not giving up hope just yet. I'll spray on 2 more coats, 10 minutes between each coat, and hopefully it doesn't look as bad as the last time. So I sanded down the white, then I used some alcohol to clean it, and I've already applied 1 coat of clear coat, and I mean, it looks okay. Not perfect by any means. You can sort of see the glare off the hood, how it's kind of drying. That's what the hood looks like. And you can also see some white spatter like here, where the white paint didn't come out so wonderfully. But anyway, just letting the first clear coat dry. Looks like you can start to see some orange peel right there forming, which is great. And then I'll sand it down after waiting about 3 or 4 days. But first I'll apply 2 more coats of clear, spaced 10 minutes apart. So I've removed all the tape and the paper and everything, the masking that I had. This is how it sort of turned out. I've already washed it so you can see water. But I washed it with just some warm water, and it would have probably turned out better had I not made the mistake twice with that atomizer little tip in the paint. Anyway, now that I've wiped down all the surfaces, I'm now going to use 1500 grit sandpaper by hand, and I'm going to wet sand it with the water there. So keep the surface nice and wet, wipe it down, or sand it down with the 1500 grit hand sand. After I'm done that, wash it, and then repeat the process with 2000, 3000, 5000 grit sandpaper. And what I'll do is long back and forth strokes along the length of the body of the vehicle and on the side along the side of the vehicle, just so I don't get swirl marks. So not circular, but instead back and forth long strokes. So I'm finally done the body work, and one thing I didn't think ahead of time was how it would blend with the bumper. Obviously there's rust stains on the bumpers. You can kind of see a yellowing on the rear bumper, so I should have maybe painted with the bumper on so it would have blended a little bit nicer. You can also see I didn't do the best tape job. You can see some marking over there. Looks good from far. That's about it. Not perfect. You can see some of the body color, I guess, or the primer is showing through in some of the areas, so it's definitely a homemade paint job, but maybe better than what it was with the rust spots. You can't really see where the rust holes were in the hood previously, so this will do. I spent $20 on body filler, $14 on primer, and $37 for 2 different cans of white paint. I also already had the rubbing alcohol and sandpaper and the clear coat I previously bought for the headlights that I restored in a previous video. So to remove the rust, it cost me $71, and this project car overall cost me $1,040. I also spent about 90 hours of time up until I started the rust removal process at the beginning of this video. But at the end of this video, I had now spent about 111 hours working on this car. Based on current resale value of clean 2002 Honda Civics, I estimate that I'll be able to sell this vehicle for about $2,500. Thank you for watching.